And I imagine ourselves 40 days after we left Egypt. We're approaching, we can begin to see the mountain in the distance. We're going to get there in another 4 days. Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, we're going to get there. Tuesday, we'll be there. Well, this is Parshas Bahar. The word Bahar means the mountain. So that makes us feel that we're approaching Shavuos, even though Bahar is not about the giving of the Torah. Giving the Torah is in Parshas Yisrael, and Eschama and other Parshas describes the whole thing. Bahar, that we're from Bahar, we learn something different. We learn on the mitzvah of Shemitah. But the fact that the Parsha begins with such a word, the whole thing is orchestrated so wonderfully that as we approach Shavuos, we read Bahar, because we're standing in front of the mountain. And on the first, in 3 days' time, when we enter the Jewish people, it was 3,333 years ago, 3333. Exactly to the day, it's coming Tuesday, the Jewish people entered the wilderness of Sinai and stood before the mountain. How did they stand before the mountain? It was remarkable in that it's the only time the Jewish people encamped in 40 years that they weren't quarreling with each other. They say 2 Jews, 3 opinions. People they're always are having arguments. Sometimes more serious, sometimes actually rebellions, but they're always, cantankerous people. But when they came to Har Sinai, that was the only time there was no arguments. It was like it says, the sages say it was like one person with one heart. They had one heart for one God to receive one Torah at one time. Remarkable. What do we learn? What do we learn from Shemitah year? What's the idea of Shemitah year? Shemitah year is like you have a Sabbath once every 7 days. Shemitah year is once every 7 years. Once every 7 years for Jews living in the land of Israel. When the Beis HaMikdash is standing, then the Shemitah year is Al Pi Torah, is according to Torah. Nowadays, we don't have all the Jewish people in Israel, and we don't have the Beis HaMikdash standing. So the fact that we keep Shemitah year is only a rabbinical enactment. It's what they call Midah Rabbanon. It's from the rabbis, it's from the sages. It's a decree of the sages. It's not from the Torah. It's from the sages. According to the Torah, when all the Jewish people are in Israel and the Beis HaMikdash is standing, then the Shemitah year is a sabbatical year, a Sabbath, a Shabbos for the land. And that means that we don't work the land, we withdraw. We withdraw from our influence. Now, this is a very wonderful thing, because just like the taking off from work once a week on the Shabbos gives a person energy and koyach and renews all his talents to continue with his life, the sabbatical year renews the land. But it's a very severe test. It's a very hard test for a farmer, because the nature of a person is, when you build something, it's very hard to watch it go to ruination. And a farmer works his land and tends the land. He plows, he plants, he weeds, he harvests, he brings the fruits of his labors to the market, he sells them. Shemitah year doesn't do anything like that. The land gets a complete rest, and the farmer has to stand by and watch the animals come and eat up the food, and he can't tend the crops and make sure that they survive. He has to watch it all go down. Hashem demands it. Why? Because there's two aspects about God that we understand. Number one, we know that God is the creator of the whole world. That's not the idea of Shavuos. That's the idea of Rosh Hashanah, that Hashem creates the world. You with me, Rachel? Hashem is the creator of the world. So what's the idea of Shemitah Iyar? The idea of Shemitah Iyar is that he's not just the creator, he's the owner. He's the boss. It's his world, it's his land. We don't own anything. We're just tenants on the land. So if he says no work this year, then there's no work this year. So what are you going to do if you're not working? You're going to go to the base of Medrash. You're going to renew your abilities to learn and to daven and to meditate and think about Hashem, to communicate with Hashem. And that's the point of the year of Shemitah. A person is born to work. A person doesn't work, it's no good. Everybody has to work. Depends what you work at. So in Shemitah Iyar, the farmer has to work at his relationship with Hashem. What about the field? What about the crops? What about the customers? What about the marketing? So nowadays, like I said, it's very, very hard because a farmer invests, especially today when farms are very large scale, huge amounts of money are invested in developing a farm. Irrigation, watering systems, machines to plow the land, the machines to plant the land, the machines to harvest, tend the land, the machines to harvest the land. Tons of money goes into building a farm. And to watch it all go down the drain is very, very hard. Anybody can just come and take it. They don't have to pay you. You're not allowed to ask them for any money. But Hashem pays back in different ways. And you can go online and read the true stories about people who are undertaking nowadays in Israel to keep Shemitah without any shortcuts. There are shortcuts. There are rabbinical shortcuts how you can get around Shemitah, how you can really work the land and still keep Shemitah. What do? They buy all their food from Arabs instead of from Jews. They sell the land. You know, like we do on Passover, we sell the chametz. They sell the land of Israel to Arabs. So then it's really the Arabs' food, it's not our food. But there are numbers of people, growing numbers of farmers who aren't plugging into this. They don't want to do it. They want to do it like the Torah says. And what it requires and what it brings out in a person is tremendous reliance on Hashem. We have to trust in Hashem, and we have to believe that since He's asking us to do this, He will take care. I remember reading a story about a person had a huge business. He had greenhouses growing flowers, which he exported to Europe and to America. He had a huge flower farm. It's a big business, flowers. To see here Friday afternoon, the people selling flowers, $20, $30 a bundle for a bouquet for the house. It's a big business. So he had flowers and he decided he's going to keep Shemitah. His friends influenced him. He decided he's going to go for it. What happened? All of a sudden there was a plague. All the flowers died. He was ruined. He couldn't sell anything. He lost a fortune. What could he do? What could he do? But he kept Shemitah Iyar. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered if he didn't keep, if he kept or he didn't keep. The flowers all died. There was nothing he could do about it. Didn't know why. Turned out the reason why was that an airplane had been hired to spray insecticide on nearby farms, and the wind had carried it over, and the insecticide mist had landed on his property and killed all his flowers. Some months later, he gets a big check in the mail. What for? The company was insured that had hired the plane, and they were paying him for the damage to his crops. And it was more than he would have made selling them in the international market. And there are many other stories like this. There's another story about some Jews. They went to a kibbutz in the desert, in the Negev. They called it komamius, which means upright. Like we say in the prayers, that we ask Hashem to lead us upright to our holy land, to build the base of Mikdash. So they called their kibbutz komamiyut. And they were trying to make a farm in the desert. What are exactly the details? How did it go? They needed seed. So they went to a nearby, an established kibbutz, and they asked them if they had any seed that they could buy. They said, "You want to buy seed?" You know what? He says, "We have a lot, but it's all rotten and we don't want it. It's in the shed. You can take as much as you want." And they took it. The people gave it to them, said, "Take it for free. It's useless." And they took it and they planted it, and came up a bumper crop. A huge crop. Was unbelievable. All the other kibbutzim came over to see this beautiful crop of wheat that grew in the new kibbutz. Again, you can see this story also online if you type in Google Koma Miut. And then they were jealous. They felt bad that they had given it all away, and they took the people who were running the kibbutz. They took them to Beis Din. They took them to rabbinical court, that they had to give them money because they made a compromise. They gave them a settlement. So anyway, so we're seeing with our eyes stories all the time, more and more, about people who keep Shemitah iyar. The point of Shemitah iyar is that we have to rely on Hashem, we have to trust in Hashem, and not think that we can micromanage the world. We can't. It's Hashem's world. That's the message of Shemitah. And that's this week's parsha. All right. So now we're learning about the Rosh of a Toiv Loi. So let's imagine, just like we had the idea of the tzaddik who has Ra, maybe he has 0% Ra as a complete tzaddik, maybe he has 1% Ra, 5% Ra, but very little. Because tzaddik, 1% is not good, still lurking in his character. Okay. Then we have the Rasha. The Rasha is the opposite image, where he has 1%. Well, the lowest level of the Rasha, he only has 1% of goodness left in him. But the highest level of the Rasha could be like 98% holy. But that 2% is not holy. The 2% is from the Yetzer Hara. And then he says, we can understand this in terms of the garments of the soul, which are thought, speech, action, and we want to take into account frequency, and I didn't leave enough room here, also quality. Okay. So in this person, the Rosh of the wicked person who has a very strong, active Yetzer Tov. Page 165, this rank is divided into myriads of degrees, differing in terms of quantity, that's how much, and quality, exactly what type of problem does this person suffer from. Page 168, 166, the highest level of the Rasha seems to be a very righteous person. The Yetzer Tov is minimally, very minimally dominated by his Yetzer Hara. And even these, the second Hebrew lines here, even these are not permanent, they're not frequent, they're at distant intervals. He makes a mistake, he slips up, he says a word that's untoward, he wastes some time that could be used for learning or doing mitzvahs. He somehow behaves a little bit on the stingy side. He could give more to tzedakah, instead he gives less. And the Yetzer Hara only takes control, has an influence over some small part of his character, causing it to be, it says the bottom of the page 166, that his body, which is called the small city, becomes conquered territory, and his soul becomes a chariot. His soul and his body becomes a chariot to the Yetzer Hara, and becomes a garment, to the bottom of page 166, a garment for the animal soul, which it wears. And the garments of the animal soul are thought, speech, and action. Page 167. Now he spells it out. Oh, b'ma'isa levad. It could be that this person has a problem only in the realm of activities. La'aseh saveres, kalos. If he does a transgression, he does minor transgressions, not serious transgressions. Maybe he forgets to say a bracha achreinu after eating. He forgets to say a bracha. Or he forgets which bracha he's supposed to say, says the wrong bracha. Or forgets to count Sfiras Ha'omer. You wouldn't say that's as serious as a person who deceives other people and steals their money. So it's maybe just small transgressions. Averes kalos v'lei chamores chas v'sholom, not serious transgressions. Heaven forbid. Heaven forbid, because we have to remember that any transgression is a serious problem. Any transgression is a serious problem. A person is sick and they have to take medicine, and the doctor gives them the wrong medicine. There's a little mistake, just a little mistake. There is such a story like that. I'm sure there are many stories like that. A person's in the hospital. Mrs. Newman in California, when she was a child, she was terribly scalded by a pot of boiling water Friday afternoon. Tipped the pot over on herself. Little child. Her whole body was burned. They didn't know if she would survive. They rushed her to the hospital. Her uncle, her great uncle, was the Rebbe's secretary, and he was very involved, and the Rebbe was involved, and gave brachas that she would be okay, and the father should make a sudas haida'ah. The father, Rabbi Shochat, the one who, she's the, in the translations of Likutei Sichos they have downstairs, translated by Rabbi Emmanuel Shochat. That's her brother, okay? The Rebbe said you should make a Sudas Haidah. Sudas Haidah is a Thanksgiving meal when a person like recovers from a serious illness. You make a Suda, a meal, invite your friends to thank Hashem for the miracle that you were saved. So the Rebbe said, she's in the hospital struggling for her life. You should make a Suda Saidah because like Shmita, you have to have reliance and confidence and belief because you are confident that she's going to survive. Hashem is going to help her. That's what the Rebbe said. You should make a Suda Saidah. So they made a Suda Saidah, and it turned out that the father was sick that Shabbos. He didn't go to shul. The congregants didn't know what it meant. Did it mean the little child had died, and that's why he didn't come to shul? They came just to see if everything was okay. And he was making a farbrengen, and they were drinking, and they were dancing and singing. And they were so surprised. But she got better. And then all of a sudden there was a reversal. And she starts getting worse and worse. And they get a call from the hospital. If you want to see your daughter again, you better come to the hospital right away. So they rushed down to the hospital, and at the same time, they called New York to the Rebbe's secretary with this piece of news. And the Rebbe said, it cannot be. It cannot be. Check the medicine. And they checked the medicine. They found that the nurse had been giving the wrong medicine to the child. And that's why the child was on the verge of leaving this world. And they corrected the medicine, and the child got better. So a little Aveira is not a little Aveira. And so the Alter Rebbe says, even a little Aveira, you have to say Chas v'Sholem, heaven forbid. The consequences are very serious. You're breaking Hashem's rules. You're cutting yourself off from the source of life, which is Hashem. Okay? So that's in the realm of action. This tzaddik, this Rasha, who is basically a good person, but he's still a Rasha because sometimes he does something wrong, but little things, only little things, and very infrequently. Okay? Going back now to page 167, that's where we were. Or second of the garments of the soul is, first is action, second is thought, is speech. So it could be that this person has a problem only in speech. His actions are perfect. He keeps every mitzvah perfectly. But in speech alone, sometimes he slips up. We're not going to say that he says Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is a big, serious problem. It's a Lashon Hara, gossip and slander, is prohibited from the Torah itself. It's not a rabbinical enactment. It's like murder and robbery and adultery. It's very serious. It says a person speaks slander and gossip. He kills 3 people. He kills the person he's talking about. He kills the person who hears it, and he kills himself because he's doing a transgression against God. And if he's passing it along, then he kills the person also who invented the whole thing in the first place, especially if it's not true. Lashon Hara can also be true, but we're not allowed to say it. So we're not talking about that person. That person is is in serious trouble. This person is not in serious trouble. He's in minor trouble. So what's his problem in speech? He doesn't say Lashon Hara, but maybe he hints of Lashon Hara. So that's called the dust of Lashon Hara. Like sometimes a person says something and you're skeptical about it, and you don't want to say bad about the person, you just make a face, or you crinkle your nose. Like that. Hey, you didn't say Lashon Hara, but that's called the dust of Lashon Hara, where the person knows what you mean. You don't say it, but he knows what you mean. Or in a discussion about a certain topic, and you just mention someone's name, you don't say they did anything, but everybody else understands what you're hinting. That's called the dust of Lashon Hara. That's very serious, and that's something that might happen to this person who is a rasha of a toiv loy, basically a good person, but he makes mistakes. And because when you make a mistake, you're called wicked. What does it say in English here? He borders. He doesn't say slander. He doesn't make fun of holy things, but he borders on it. Like a person says, are you going to hear the lecture of that rabbi? And he says, him? He didn't say Lashon Hara. Or just makes a look like that. Not. So that's in the realm of speech. Or moving right along in the garment of thought. How can a person be a rasha in thought? Well, if you think about doing something evil, if you think about hurting somebody, you think about how you're going to take revenge on somebody, these are major transgressions in the realm of thought. That can lead to what's called an iyar hara, that you can actually really hurt people just by thinking negative thoughts about them. On the opposite side of the coin, you can really help people by thinking good thoughts about them. When you think good, it makes things good. Always try to think good, find a merit in somebody. I just read a story from the writings of the previous Rebbe that he wrote that one time the Alter Rebbe came into the Zal where the Hasidim were, and he said, get mashka, we have to verbring. He said, why do you want to verbring? He said, because I was able to fulfill a teaching in the Tanya. What was the teaching in the Tanya? It says in the Tanya that a person has to think well of every Jewish person. If something happens to another person, he suffers, bad things happen to him, you shouldn't think, oh yeah, that's because he did this and this. There are certain rabbis in Israel nowadays, they should, are very, very, the Rebbe would be very, very angry at that kind of talk where they are blaming, they want to blame non-religious people because they're non-religious people in Israel, they're not so careful about Torah and mitzvahs. That's why all these people were killed and injured in Meron. That's disgusting. They don't know why anything happened, and they have no right to judge somebody else. And who says they're any better on their level? So you're not allowed to think badly about a person. And if you think about doing something wrong, doing a transgression in thought, that's a transgression. You're not allowed to think badly, but always they say, tracht good, think good, thinking good makes things good. What about if a person thinks about something that you're not supposed to do? So that's a transgression. What if a person thinks about something that you're allowed to do, but not under the circumstances, not just now? And he gives an example. And he says, a person, this rasha, his problem may be that he thinks about things, about doing a transgression, that they're not big transgressions. In fact, there's nothing wrong with them if they're done in the right way. But in the wrong way, you're not allowed. I'll give you an example. We're supposed to do tshuva. In doing tshuva, you have to regret mistakes that you made in the past. When should you do it? You learn in chapter 25 of the Tanya, before you go to sleep at night. That's good time to think back on the sins of your youth, so to speak. Mistakes that you made. You had an argument with somebody during the day, and maybe you said something, maybe you lost your temper. Tzaddikim don't lose their temper. You did things that you're not supposed to do. So before you go to sleep at night, you think over the day, what did I do? A person has to know, what did he do during the day? What did I accomplish? What did I fail to accomplish? Did I make any mistakes? How can I fix them tomorrow? I better go tomorrow, apologize to this person that I lost my temper at them. I'm not allowed to lose my temper. I better go apologize to them tomorrow. First opportunity. And then we'll be good friends. It's not easy to apologize, but it's very sweet afterwards. So that's an example of thinking good thoughts, thinking tshuva thoughts, having regret for mistakes that you made. Now I'll ask you a question. What if during this class you're thinking about mistakes that you made? Is that a mitzvah? Is that the mitzvah of tshuva? No. Because when you're in class learning Torah, you have to be concentrating on learning Torah. And you're thinking about your spiritual well-being and your need to do tshuva when you're supposed to be learning Torah, that's a transgression. Or what if you're working, you're on a job, and you're daydreaming, you're not doing your work. Why are you daydreaming? Because you're worried about transgressions that you made. You're worried about an argument that you had. You're worried about when you lost your temper. You're worried about things when you have to be working for your employer. So we learned for Yaakov. Yaakov worked for Lavan for 20 years, and he worked every single minute. He never stole a minute from his wicked employer. Even though he was a wicked person, he never stole a minute. So one way that we might steal a minute is when we are being paid for our time and we don't use our time in the employment that we're being paid for, but we use our time to think about transgressions that we did and we need to do tshuva. So that's a very minor kind of transgression that you might say applies to the realm of thought, the garment of thought. In the rush of a toiv law, he's doing a mitzvah. Well, he gives another example here in the Tanya, that obviously when a man gets married, you're not allowed to have a relationship with a woman that you're not married to, or she's married to somebody else. That's called adultery. It's one of the 10 commandments. You're not allowed. When you get married, you are allowed to have intimacy with your wife. Obviously, it's a mitzvah. What about if a person thinks about it during the day? Then it's a transgression. You're not allowed to think about it during the day. In fact, he quotes from the Torah. It says, pasuk in the Torah, "V'nishmarta mikol davar ra," you should guard your soul from every bad thing. And the sages say, what does it mean, guard yourself from every bad thing? It means thinking about things like that, thinking about intimacy at times when you're not supposed to, during the day. That's not the time to be thinking about relations with one spouse. So that's the bottom of page 157. Even when a person doesn't contemplate doing a sin, but just indulges in thinking about intimacy with one's wife, or as a girl with one's husband, and he violates the commandment of the Torah, guard yourself against every wicked thing. Well, that's said, the context of the pasuk is talking about idolatry. When the sages applied it, gave it a more breadth, and applied it to the intimate relations in marriage. When it's a time when a person should be learning a shir in Torah or during work, and he turns to think about other things. Tanya Kedetnan ba'aves, like we learn in Pirkei Avos, Haneir Malayla, Mafana, when a person wakes up in the middle of the night, etc., and he turns his mind to idle thoughts, then this is considered a transgression. What does it mean? He wakens at the night and he turns his mind to idle thoughts. So the sages explain that when you wake up in the middle of the night, this is a hard one. You know what you're supposed to do? A lot of people, they wake up in the middle of the night, they get up and they freshen themselves up and they go back to bed. Number one, transgressor, right here. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to get up, wash your hands, put on a bathrobe and slippers, say brachas, and learn. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then go back to bed. So it says, a person awakens at night and turns his heart to vanity is guilty against his own soul. If you don't get it, if you don't learn. So obviously these are not serious transgressions in action, not in speech, not in thought. But in any of these instances, page 168, the bottom, he's called a Rasha at that moment. At that moment, he's called wicked. Shahara shabanafshe, because the evil of the Yetzer Hara, which is in the left side of his heart, goiver boy. At that moment, it conquers the city, which is his heart. Umislabish begufe, and the Yetzer Hara is now enclosed in all of his 248 organs. Umachatiyah, maybe, or some of them, or one of them. Umachatiyah, and the Yetzer Hara lures him into transgression, umetamoy, and makes him impure. Page 169. But afterwards, you fall off a horse, you learn how to ride, you fall off a horse, what do? You get right back on. When the Yetzer Hara gets the better of you and you realize you were doing something not the way you want to do it, not right, what do? You don't give up, you try harder. Like the rental car company. Hertz is the best, and Avis tries harder. We have to try harder. After this momentary lapse, Goiver boy hatayv, the evil inclination got the better of him. Now the Yetzer Toiv fights back and fights hard and predominates and regains control. Shabanafshe elokis, from the godly soul regains control of the situation. Umischaret, and from the godly soul now come feelings of regret, intense regret. And we learned in the previous chapter that intense regret is the first factor of tshuva. That's the first requirement in doing tshuva, is you have to realize that you did something wrong, and you have to regret it. And you have to admit it. 1 is to realize. 2 is to say it in speech, I know I did it. 3 is to apologize. Or if you took money, return the money. Whatever you did, correct it if it's at all possible. If you ate something, you didn't say a bracha, nothing you can do about that. But now the Yetzer Toiv is fighting back, trying to regain control of this person's life. So therefore the person apologizes. Either if you did something against somebody else, you can't apologize to Hashem, you have to apologize to the person. If you hurt somebody's feelings or you cheated them, it doesn't help to tell Hashem, I'm sorry, Hashem, I did the wrong thing. You have to give back the money to the person. And you ask forgiveness from Hashem on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or Slicha, you ask Slicha from Hashem Yislach Loi, and Hashem will forgive him. Im Shav B'Teshuva Ro'oya, if he does proper tshuva. How do you do proper tshuva? Okay, we've got a book of the Tanya about that. That's the 3rd book of the Tanya. Al Pi Atzas Hachamenu, Zichreinu Livrocha, if we follow the directions and the instructions and the guidelines of our sages about how to do tshuva, in the 3 levels of tshuva and of atonement that Rabbi Yishmael would teach, like is explained elsewhere. And we'll finish up this chapter. We have school on Monday, right? Erev Yom Tov? Yeah, we have school on Monday. Monday night is Rosh Hashanah. It's not Yom Tov. Yom Tov is the following week. Okay, so we'll finish up the chapter on Monday. You see, we'll move much faster now.
Which Rosh Hashanah?
What?
Rosh Hashanah?
When is Rosh Hashanah? No, Rosh Chodesh. The first, did I say Rosh Hashanah? Oh, it's a slip of the tongue. Rosh Chodesh is a Monday night and Tuesday, Rosh Chodesh. Okay, attendance, Sarah Cohn, Rachel Pinsalu, everybody else is sleeping in, Chanabina, Michal Fernandez, Danny Hess didn't make it, Ariel didn't make it, Leora didn't make it, Mrs. Kessler didn't make it. What?
They're probably on the Zoom.
Nope.
No?
No, I can see.
I'm on the Zoom.
Oh, you are. Your names are hidden up there. Oh, I have to mark you down. Ariel, yes, you're there. Danny Hess, good for you. Esther Bela. Hello, Esther Bela. And who's Esther? There's another Esther there. I see a name, Esther. And Devora Capel. Oh, Devora Capel, Mrs. Capel. Devora. And there's an Esther. Oh, okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Esther, what's your last name, Esther?
Ilyayev, Ilyayev.
N-Y-A-Y-E?
B.
Okay, thank you all. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everybody.
No, another. Brother's house? Yes, say.